Good morning, dear friends, and welcome once more to the Main Object Big Book Study of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am an alcoholic. My name is David, so happy and blessed to be here with each one of you. And our friend Cheryl is going to read the AA preamble, which I think should now be on the screen.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl, and I'm an alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not aligned with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And now, pardon me, I would like to invite everybody in joining me to invite God into this meeting with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. As I think everybody knows, I don't know if it doesn't look like there's anyone new here, but as I think everyone knows, we are going through the big book line by line, big book study meeting, breaking the text down or categorizing it into 5 categories. And I talk about that a lot in the 5 categories, but I think the more important thing, it's not so much about the categories, it is about the benefits that I have found from taking my time. First of all, 2 things: going slow through the book and categorizing the text into 5 primary categories. And what that does is it turns the book into, for me, a powerful tool that I then feel comfortable with, familiar with, and empowered to use to help other people. I don't know. I'm going to take a quick poll here. Has anybody felt either confused or overwhelmed when approaching the big book? Just me? Yes. Okay. Okay. And and it seems like the longer that I was sober, I mean, that's better than it is now, or better than it used to be for sure. But it seems like there was a point at which the longer I was sober, the more confused and overwhelmed I became. And I don't know if anybody else can relate to that. And it was because when I first got to the big book, I was let's just say that I definitely had a desire to not drink, and I was definitely, thank God, sober. But in all other respects, my character defects had more influence over me than my recovery. And one of the character defects I had was, I guess the kind way to put it would be intellectual arrogance. And so I would look at the big book and I would say, oh my word, that thing is so outdated and it's so trite and all those sayings and it's sexist language and please. And and then it seemed like as God opened me up and got me in touch with my character defects, and I suddenly became willing and, quite frankly, frightened of my character defects. Suddenly, the book took on so much more resonance. It really spoke to me in a way that was extraordinary. So I hope that it does for you. I don't want to go on and on about that. So, just so you know, the format is I'm going to go through a section of text today until about 7 o'clock, and then we'll open it up for comments. And just FYI, we are on page 39, second full paragraph. Last week we visited with our friend, the Jaywalker. Prior to that, the week before, we visited with our friend Jim, the car salesman. And now we're going to close out the trifecta this morning, and we're going to begin the first of a two-part visit with Fred the accountant. And then we'll be finished with, next week, we'll be finished with more about alcoholism, and we will go into We Agnostics. So in 2 weeks. So, and just know, FYI, that as always, we're recording the meeting, and we record my part only because I don't want to put anybody, especially if you're new, in an uncomfortable position to have your shares recorded and posted, because we post them on YouTube in case anybody misses the meeting or wants to catch up. Anyway, let's jump into the text. We're on page 39. We're at the second full paragraph where we meet Fred. The first several sentences, I'll clue you into this, are in green, which means it's an explanation or description. And that is, so we're meeting Fred. And here's what we learn about Fred. Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. Forgive me, folks. I jumped ahead of myself. I do have a summary. I always like to do a little summary. It just helps me orient to what's going on. So let me go through that, and then I'll jump back to the text. With the account of the Jaywalker, along with that of Fred the car salesman, Jim the car salesman, typo, Bill Wilson, the author, vividly illustrates the nature of our malady as alcoholics. That malady being we lack the ability to consistently change or alter our current or future behavior based on any knowledge or insight gained from past experience. Now, bear in mind, as human beings, the ability to take past experience in order to alter or improve future actions, as human beings, that has allowed us to survive and thrive. But while it works in many areas, it doesn't with alcoholism. So the two examples of the Jaywalker and Jim show us that even though this strategy may serve us well in most other areas of life, it fails miserably when attempting to rescue us from the inevitable disaster of taking that next drink. With the tale of Fred the accountant, which we're going to see today, Bill takes a critical step forward, for in addition to once again showing us the problem, he now drives home the necessity of accepting without reservation the solution. So with the Jaywalker and with Jim the car salesman, what we've really seen are vivid examples of the problem in action. And it even says with Jim the car salesman, he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. But we go much more deeply into that with Fred. So we're really setting the stage, I would say, for the next chapter, We Agnostics, where we dive fully into the notion of a spiritual way of life. So once more, back to the text. Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, is happily married, and the father of promising children of college age. Description all in green. So it sounds like we're meeting Fred, and Fred is a pretty successful, competent individual. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everybody. So he's not only successful and hardworking, he's popular. If ever there was a successful businessman, it is Fred. So he's not only a successful businessman, he is, as Bill says, he's probably like the pinnacle. If you wanted to see an ideal of a successful businessman, it's Fred. To all appearances, he is a stable, well balanced individual. Wow, this is great. Yet he is also alcoholic. So up till now, everything has been description, so it's green. However, the almost, except for the last sentence that starts at the last line, the rest of this paragraph is in pink for a warning. Because now we're getting into the nature of Fred's malady. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of the jitters. That sentence to me is a warning for two reasons. The first reason being, well, of course, it says that Fred was hospitalized. It says the jitters, but we're inferring that it had something to do with his drinking. Because, of course, that's when Fred connected with Alcoholics Anonymous. But the bigger warning in that sentence, which took me a while to connect the dots on, but I'll share with you, the bigger warning in that sentence is, I'm going to assume for a minute that when it says he was in the hospital for the jitters, that is not why Bill, let's say Bill and Bob or whomever, that's not why the members of Alcoholics Anonymous think he's in the hospital. They think he's in the hospital because of his drinking. But Fred thinks he's in the hospital or says he's in the hospital for his jitters. Do you see the problem there? Like, this isn't my drinking. I just have a little case of the nerves. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. That part is understandable. Most of us have experienced that shame. However, the problem with the shame is when it leads us to minimize the impact of our drinking on ourselves and on those around us. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. There we go. Also a warning. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. So the doctor is giving him the real deal. For a few days he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Notice there is a similarity with Jim the car salesman. Jim the car salesman also had high character and high morals. And unlike the earlier statement, I will assume here that that's not just Fred rationalizing. That is actually true. He actually has high character and high standing. So the point that Bill is making is that high character and high understanding are wonderful, but they're not going to keep you from drinking, and they're not going to solve the problem. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. So up till now, everything is a warning. And that last sentence would be, I would say, the equivalent of the sentence we find when learning about Jim, that he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. So we will assume for a moment there is a parallel between Fred and Jim. An unwillingness to enlarge their spiritual lives. Okay, the next sentence I just have, you could keep it pink, it's up to you. I put it in green because it's just more, it shifts a little bit to description. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. Straightforward enough. Now it's back to pink. The rest of this paragraph is in pink. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that his humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. Okay, I think it's necessary because there's something incredibly important in those few sentences. And I don't know if it jumped out at you, but when I really spent some time meditating on this text, here's what I realized. The underlying issue or problem, or one of them, with Fred is that they're saying, when the AA members came to see him, he related to the problem like, yes, I have the same problem as you. And he aligned with the problem. Like, yes, I have the same problem you guys have. But he did not align, or he did not accept the solution. And I want us to think about this for a minute, because how many people do we encounter, or how many of us have experienced going to AA and relating to the problem, but not the solution? Meaning, yes, I have this. Yes, it's creating an issue in my life. Yes, I know I'm powerless over alcohol. And oh yeah, that spiritual solution and those amends and an inventory, when I clear up, I'll get to that. Do you see the disconnect there? So Fred relates to the problem and not the solution. And again, I think any AA meeting, especially one where there's no alcohol being served, is a good AA meeting. Okay? I'm not saying, I don't want to get into characterizing or judging AA meetings, but I will say you can hear the signals of that dynamic about focusing more on the problem than the solution. When you hear comments like, I come to hear about alcohol. I come to hear about the drinking. Now, I'm not saying that talking about alcohol or talking about one's drinking is a bad thing. But often that can mean to the exclusion of the problem, or of the solution. Does that make sense? Okay, so he was positive that his humiliating experience plus the knowledge he had acquired would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. So that was the humiliating experience. It was humiliating. It was probably the most humiliating thing Fred had ever encountered. It was a standout event in his life. And Fred is applying the same logic most of us have applied with our drinking. Our past experience will influence our future behavior. Okay. And if our disease leads us astray, here's where, in this next sentence, here's where it seals our fate. We heard no more of Fred for a while. That is a dangerous sentence. And why? Not just because Fred is outside of AA, but that means that Fred's quote-unquote solution is working for him for a while. And that's how the disease seals our fate. Because what it allows us to do is use the ineffective solution, we think, successfully for a time. Does that make sense? Because think about it. If the very second we used self-will to stay sober, if that very second we ended up drunk, our brains would automatically connect self-will with pain and drunkenness. But our brains don't connect that because our disease allows us to stay sober for a while using self-will. So it reinforces the notion that self-will will solve the problem. So we heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. All warning. So in pink. The next sentence, though, next two sentences are green. Just detail or description. He soon indicated that he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive. Now, right there, actually, sorry if I'm confusing anybody. Actually, the word instructive, that's where the green ends for me, and the rest of the paragraph is in pink for warning. For here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Now, for a long time, I read that sentence and really just saw it as description. What I failed to connect with, probably because I was doing this myself, was using logic and rationality rather than a spiritual solution to address my drinking problem. So do we see that? Do we see that this, because I think this is really important. The next paragraph, all of it, how are we doing here? Oh, everything, we're going to go to the middle of the next page. I'll make it simple for you. Everything from this point forward is pink. It's all warning. Just like with the Jaywalker and Jim. A bulk of it is warning. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. We see two important things in that sentence. He relates to the problem, but not the solution. I was much impressed. Like, I saw that I did the same things you guys did. But why did he not believe it's possible for him to drink again? Because that was so horrible. I'm just going to apply what has made me successful in every other area of my life to this problem. It's worked in every other area of my life, so it's going to work here. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink. Here he is again, relating to the problem. But I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. Has anybody ever, God forbid, had a slip or know somebody who's had a slip and come back and say, it unsettles me. And again, this is not to denigrate any other AA member, but it unsettles me when I hear somebody say, I now get it. I really see it now. I reasoned I was not so far as advanced as you fellows. And here it is. He is about to completely diagnose his situation. That I had been unusually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful when you men had failed. Remember that part and forgive me if somebody knows where this is. I just off the top of my head, I don't know where it is. But I think it might be even in the next chapter, where there's the statement, many people consider spirituality the way of weakness. We consider it the way of strength. Do you see in that instance, Fred is considering spirituality the way of weakness? For those of you who are weak-willed or don't have the success skills that I have, you may need the God thing, but I don't need to go to the extremes you do. I felt I had every right to be self-confident that it would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business. For a time, all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard work of a simple matter. And there is alcohol sealing his fate. And this is why so many people who come to AA end up drinking, because they can come to AA, practice half measures, and stay sober. Some of them will stay sober their whole lives. And others, they or others around them, will try the same thing, stay sober for a while, and then drink again. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I'd been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Anybody notice the parallel? A friend of ours named Jim said, I had been to this restaurant many times during this last dry spell and didn't have a problem. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day. This is one of my favorite lines or sentences in all of the big book for some reason. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. See what he is doing even here. I mean, it's good we know this, but even here, he's trying to rationalize the drinking by saying it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me because I was not upset. And see, alcohol does not work through rationality or logic. It works through powerlessness, spiritual powerlessness. And we'll close it out with this next paragraph because I think there's an important connection here, at least for me, and then we'll open it up. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. I want to point something out that at least maybe I found very interesting. So he's crossing the threshold. He's in a hotel, crossing a threshold. The idea of a drink comes into his mind. Where do we see something very similar elsewhere in the book? And you don't have to guess, I'll take you there. Let's jump for a second to page 154. This is a vision for you. This is our founder, Bill W. He's at the Mayflower Hotel. He doesn't cross it, but he's near the threshold of a restaurant. Of course, he's talking in the third person. He's writing in the third person, but Bill's talking about himself. Of course, he couldn't drink. Why not sit hopefully at a table, a bottle of ginger ale before him? After all, had he not been sober 6 months now, perhaps he could handle, say, 3 drinks, no more. Fear gripped him. He was on thin ice. Again, it was the old insidious insanity, that first drink. Up to this point, if you're reading this, you're saying, oh my gosh, this is exactly the same thing that happened to Fred. But look what happens in the next sentence. With a shiver, he turned away and walked down the lobby to the church directory. Music and gay chatter still floated to him from the bar. He turns away from the drink. And then I won't go into all of the next paragraph, but just the next sentence. But what about his responsibilities, his family, and the men who would die because they would not know how to get well? Yes, those other alcoholics. And what we see there is the intervention or the shift that Fred does not experience. And for me, this is critical. What is the difference between Fred and Bill? Bill accepted a spiritual solution. Fred did not. So whereas Fred goes all the way through the thought with no intervention, a thought out of nowhere comes to Bill. I can't drink. I've got to help other people. Does that make sense, gang? And I'm sorry, we'll finish up momentarily. We'll just go to the end. That was all, nothing more. I ordered a cocktail and my meal. I then ordered another cocktail. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed, so I stepped into the bar, had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty the next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxicab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with the unbearable mental and physical suffering. I don't really need to comment on that part. That part makes, I think, hopefully sense for all of us. And what I'm going to do now is, forgive me, Ralph and John, I've seen your hands. I just wanted to get through this. And we're going to open up the meeting now. And so the first hand I see.